Hey there, and welcome to yet another Godzilla review in this Galen Destruction Godzilla review series. Today we have Godzilla vs. Gigan. We have 3 more movies to go in the Showa era before we're done here. When we're done with the Showa era, we're going to dip into the 1970s Kong movie, and then after that, it's off to the Heisei era. Just a little heads up on that. But we must stop here. In this movie, it's kind of some mixed emotions. There's some good, but hey, I do want to call certain things out in this movie, because I gotta be honest with you guys, not everything is perfect in this movie. It's just there are certain things that are fun and campy for what it's worth. Alright, so I should go ahead and admit as a little disclaimer, this isn't a Godzilla movie that I watch that often. It's one of those movies that kind of slides to the back of my collection and kind of gets lost in the mix because there's more important Godzilla movies to me. I think part of it might have to do with the fact that this movie, basically, it's slow rolling, and it takes a while for anything to happen. Like, there's a lot of dialogue you gotta sit through, and it feels like a job for me personally to kind of sit down and kind of get ready for this movie, because that's how it was before I actually did this review and started filming this right here. So, this movie, it takes about 48 minutes for any monster destruction to even happen, which is kind of what we're looking for in this movie. And then after that, it's maybe like another 10 minutes later that we actually see Godzilla and Anguirus make it to the battlefield. I mean, it takes them a while, and you do see Godzilla in the beginning, but it's just one of those things that it feels like the build isn't there really. It's something is missing. I don't know how to explain it. It's just there are certain drawbacks in terms of how this movie rolls and goes along. This is not all bad news though, I do want to say though, because of the fact that once the monster fights start, they really don't end. And yes, I know there's a lot of stock footage that's used from previous Godzilla movies. A lot of that is attributed to the budget of this movie, and to fill in some of the gaps, they had to go back and just take old footage from other Godzilla movies and put it into this movie. And it can be a little annoying at certain points because it's so obvious. But when I watched this movie as a kid, it really didn't matter due to the fact that I was just happy to see yet another Godzilla movie. It's a movie that just kind of easily entertains me in a sense once the monster battling does start. Like most Godzilla movies, this movie kind of reverts back to the typical aliens controlling monster, and then after that, monster ends up destroying the planet and trying to kill us all basically. So, this formula I feel like is kind of exhausted a little bit by this point. But we get to see King Ghidorah again, it's nice to see him again, and of course we get the new monster, Gigan. Our new alien race, called the M-Space Hunter Nebula aliens. But let's just call them the Nebulans, because that rolls off a lot easier. Our new alien race is simply an advanced race of highly intelligent cockroaches wearing human skin. But, even though they are wearing the human skin, that doesn't stop their shadows from showing who they really are. So let's talk about the backstory of the Nebulans. This is a race that comes from a planet that's similar to Earth. Basically, an unnamed dominant species on said planet destroyed their ecosystem with pollution. So, the overall message of pollution is still there in this movie. The only thing is, it's kind of dialed back big time versus what it was in Godzilla vs. Ghidorah. So the Nebulans depend on our planet. They depend on the idea of killing us off, and then after that taking our planet, because essentially we're doing the same thing that the other unnamed species that was dominant to the planet that they were from did in the same place. Alright, so I'll bite. I do like the idea of the Nebulans, but I will go ahead and say that the idea of the formula of an alien race controlling a monster, or in this case, monsters, was becoming a little exhausted. One thing that I liked about Godzilla vs. Ghidorah is the sheer fact that Ghidorah was a monster thinking under its own will. At no point is it ever implied that Ghidorah was controlled by an alien race. Not that exactly we know of, but for what it's worth though, it was thinking under its own will and consuming. This, on the other hand, takes it more down the traditional route, which I'm not saying is terrible and a bad idea and I hate it. It's just that I feel like it was becoming a little exhausted. And this isn't the last time it's going to be reused, because it's going to be reused more and more in the future. And don't take this the wrong way exactly as far as this whole formula. It's just one of those things I do want to bring up as a point. But hey, putting all that aside, it's nice to see King Ghidorah again. Even though this is the last time we're going to see King Ghidorah in the Showa era, it's great to have the ultimate villain back. And also, it's also worth mentioning that King Ghidorah, even though he was seen being killed and destroyed by monsters, there's an actual reason why King Ghidorah is back. And that's due to the fact that this movie takes place in present day, 1972, and that movie was in the future. And then you have Gigan, with hooks for hands, looking like a cyborg chicken, with a buzzsaw on his belly. This is too damn cool of a monster. Even though I'm not too crazy about this movie at all, this is probably one of my favorite kaiju that's introduced in the 70s. He's still a big reason to watch this movie, even if you have to sit through some of this campy, bad editing, and even some of this dialogue which is kind of slow at points. He's still worth it. Look at King Ghidorah pulling a veteran WWE move, giving a young, new, up-and-coming heel the spotlight, allowing him to get over and get his push. A good reminder that King Ghidorah is always under control of aliens. Hey, he might not be a really bad guy. He's just always in the wrong place, and then he ends up getting his ass whipped by Godzilla, and he ends up trying to fly away. But in this movie, though, that changes, because King Ghidorah, in this time around, goes ahead and stays for the fight, even after the Nebulans are killed. Before I started recording this, I gotta say there's a lot I forgot about this movie. Like the fact that it's very comic book based themed, and also the fact that we have this giant children's amusement park, which is kind of centered around a giant Godzilla. That actually leads to one of my favorite parts I want to talk about in this movie, where Godzilla is getting up from being battered around, and he kind of has to slap his head and be like, am I seeing me? And it's like, Godzilla, little do you know, not the next movie, but the movie after, it should be happening. You'll know when it happens. I can't gloss over the sheer fact that this is also the first and only movie that Godzilla and Anguirus, for that matter, speaks in. It's kind of weird because every time Godzilla speaks, we get this weird record DJ sound effect, and it's one of those things every time people hear it, and I've seen fans say, what's up with the audio? Is there audio issues? Was the roar just messed up? What's wrong here? I don't personally think it's that. Like, I truly believe this was done intentionally. Every time you see it, in the Japanese version, you see speech bubbles pop up. But in the English version, instead, what it does is it substitutes it with this. It's, again, a maximum level cheese, just like when Godzilla was flying, but it's one of those things I love not telling other fans about, have never seen this movie, or might be new fans, because the reaction of certain things like this is just priceless. In a nutshell, though, for me, this movie, even though there is some fun, the biggest drawbacks I gotta say is the fact there's so much dialogue, and it's just not interesting. It does nothing for me. Godzilla vs. Ghidorah had me drew in every moment with everything going on. This movie, not so much. And also the overuse of stock footage just becomes a little monotonous and annoying at certain points. Like, there's so much. But it's got some great battles, and it's got plenty of explosions, enough to inspire a young Michael Bay. And then, of course, you have Anguirus' suit from Destroy All Monsters makes a return, and it gets more screen time. Well deserved, I do want to say. This is probably my favorite Anguirus suit of all time. There's no way I'm going to say the Final War suit is better than this one, because this is definitely top-notch Anguirus, and how I like my Anguirus. As for the Godzilla suit, I do want to say this is probably a record, because from 1968 to 1972, the same Godzilla suit would be reused in every movie. Now, yes, they go ahead and make some modifications and some changes and kind of patch up the suit every movie the best they can, but in this movie, the wear was so apparent, like you can actually see in the actual movie. So, the Godzilla suit would be retired, and this would be the last time you see it. Also, this would also be the last time that Nakajima would assume the role of Godzilla in the Godzilla movies, so retiring the actor who had made so many Godzilla roles famous in the previous movie since the original movie. It was just time for him to hang it up, and I want to say thank you to that man for suiting up and getting in there, and for doing everything you did. Ultimately, even though this is technically a weaker Godzilla movie than some of the previous entries, I will say for nostalgia purposes, it's still fun to watch. There's some people, though, that do love this movie. I'm not going to say that just because I like this movie less, that any of their opinions are invalid, because that's not true. Their opinions are very valid, because I understand some fans love this movie due to the fact that it has the tag team action. Yes, it's slow rolling, but a lot of the monster battling does make up for it. For me personally, though, this is a lot lower on the pole of Godzilla movies, and it's not exactly an A-lister, probably not even a B-lister, but it's alright, I'll give it that. When I step back and put this movie in perspective, I do want to say it's nice knowing that Toho didn't end the Godzilla series in 1968 with Destroy All Monsters. Why? Because of the fact that I don't want to imagine a Godzilla universe without Gigan, who's definitely one of my favorite Godzilla monsters. I should also point out that despite the fact that I have criticized the fact this movie uses stock footage, I do love the fact that it reuses old sound effects and old pieces from other Godzilla movies and their soundtrack. There's something about that. I'm just a sucker for that, I'm going to be honest. I know it's probably a little contradicting of me to say that and to criticize the stock footage, but I'm okay, and I can allow it for soundtracks and old pieces. That's all I can say about this movie, so get ready for next week because we have Godzilla vs. Megalon, a movie that's even campier than this one. It's still a fun movie and it has its own legacy. Thank you for watching and you have a great day.